We've seen protests across the country demanding justice following the killing of George Floyd. From small towns to big cities, countless people from all walks of life have taken to the streets to protest George Floyd's death and demand reform. One protest in Boston drew tens of thousands of people. It was organized by Black Lives Matter in collaboration with the group Violence in Boston. Monica Cannon-Grant is an activist and founder and CEO of the Violence in Boston organization, and she joins me now. Monica, thanks very much for being with us. First, I want to note that you are in your car because you have just come from a meeting in New York City with the daughter of Eric Garner. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we drove down yesterday morning to be with her because the chokehold bill was passed here in New York yesterday, and she wanted to lay flowers where her father was murdered. And so we did that, and we prayed in the spot, and she brought a photo of her dad, and we just really sat in that space just due to the advocacy of survivors. And so that's why I'm in New York. The moment this interview is over, I'll be driving back to Boston.
So I do want to start with a little bit of your own background as well. You started the Violence in Boston organization back in 2017. Why did you start it?
So the organization started because somebody tried to kill my son. We were using Violence in Boston as a hashtag to highlight the violence that was happening in communities of color. And in that process, I still live in a community that at any given moment is shot up, and someone had put a gun to my son's head and pulled the trigger, and the gun jammed. And at that point, I knew it was time for me to try to figure out what was happening. And this is prior to becoming a nonprofit. And we just kept using the hashtag, and a woman named Zena Merchant paid for me to become a nonprofit in 2017, because up until that point, I was doing this work out of my kitchen.
And now here we are in 2020. How did you organize tens of thousands of people to come out and protest in Boston?
Well, I had some experience. In 2017, I organized 45,000 people to march against racism after what transpired in Charlottesville. And so this go round, it was a little bit easier. I partnered with Black Lives Matter as a former activist of Black Lives Matter. I just called up a few of my friends that are in the activist world, and I used my network and my social media, and I mobilize people. You know, when people know the issues, they know what's happening. All you have to do is let them know what our goals are, what we're fighting for, and what the mission is, and they show up.
And what effect do you think these recent cases, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, are going to have on the country as a whole moving forward here? Because this is not, as you and others have pointed out, this is not a new story.
Right. And so one of the things that I love that Will Smith has said in the past is none of these things are new. It's just that they're recorded, right? And they've been recorded in the past, but I think this time we're dealing with people who are essentially just tired. We're exhausted. We're tired. And at this point in 2020, we should not still have to profess that Black Lives Matter.
Well, there has been, as you know, an intense discussion about police reform in the past few weeks, and everyone from grassroots activists to politicians are putting forward what they hope will be some solutions. Are you confident that there are enough diverse voices and viewpoints represented in these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the conversation needs to be, it's multi-layered. We have to talk about the issue with systematic racism and white supremacy in this country dealing with Black folks. And then we have to talk about white people addressing white supremacy within their circles, within their organizations, within their homes. And then we have to deal with politicians and elected officials who need to know that at this point, we're no longer asking, we're demanding that change happens. But then also we're asking that police officers be held to a higher standard than the community because they're the ones that took an oath.
What are the top 3 goals that you would like to see happen? What do you think needs to happen immediately for there to be progress on this?
So a couple of things. I think immediately we should work on things that defund police departments and put more funding into prevention. there's not enough money that goes into prevention. A lot of the things that happen can be prevented. I think the other thing we do is fight legislation. So my Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, is working on a piece of legislation right now in regards to police brutality. And then there are 3 pieces of legislation that we're fighting for on a federal level. It's the Eric Gardner law, the Andrew Curse Act, and the Stephon Clark law. Stephon Clark law is to prevent from being shot in your back 8 times when you're running away from the police. The Andrew Curse Act demands that police departments provide medical attention to those who express distress in their custody. And then the Eric Gardner law, which prevents chokeholds. We're pushing for those things to become federal law. Right now, they're getting a lot of good traction in their states, but we want those to be the case on the federal level. And then the last thing I would say is when a police officer has a record of causing harm, shooting people and killing people, he should not be able to go and be a police officer in another state.
All right, Monica Cannon Grant, we have to leave it there, but I thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.